Good morning. Welcome to Iron Sharpens Iron. My name is Jeremy Nettles. I'm the evangelist for the River Ridge Church of Christ that meets in Newburgh, Indiana. And if you would like to stop by and visit us, you can find us at 5600 Van Road in Newburgh. Our Sunday worship period begins at 10 a.m., but we also have a Bible study period that starts at 9 and an afternoon service at 4. And you can also find us at the same place at 7 p.m. on Wednesdays for Bible study, including classes for all ages. You can also get in touch with us at 812-550-6234 or send email to info@riverridgechurch.org. And I encourage you to check out our YouTube channel, youtube.com/River Ridge Church of Christ. We are doing another installment today in our very long-standing series on the books of the Bible. This is not anything like a substitute for you studying these books on your own, but it is a good way to introduce yourself to any given book of the Bible and hopefully impel you to study it, pique your interest in studying it on your own time as well. So today's installment in the series is the Old Testament book of Numbers. While I'm turning there, I'll point out that if you would like to catch up or to catch installments that you may have missed, then go to that YouTube channel I mentioned a moment ago, and there is a playlist there that's very cleverly entitled The Whole Bible. So just check that out and refresh your memory about what we have already hit. It's been a little while since we did the previous book of law, Leviticus. And you might have been expecting then that Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, that it would be good to have Leviticus fresh in your memory. But truth be told, no, not really. It doesn't help that much. Leviticus actually covers a hilariously short period of time, and it even seems to overlap somewhat with the beginning of the story in Numbers. But the basic plot of the story, going back to the beginning, is that throughout the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, or the Torah, Genesis tells the stories of creation, and then eventually we get to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the patriarchs of the Israelite nation. Finally, Jacob has a son named Joseph, and the last third or so of Genesis is focused on the saga of Joseph and Egypt and how Jacob and his family end up down in Egypt. And then, of course, over time they become enslaved and have to be rescued. That is the story of Exodus. God brings the Israelites to Mount Sinai, and there he begins the process of giving them the law, and they begin the process of constructing a tabernacle, a place to worship God, a place for God's earthly manifestation, or his earthly presence, we might say. Throughout that book, throughout Exodus, they were becoming God's people. They were already a nation, but they were a nation without a home and without a real culture that would distinguish it from their neighbors, because they were still in thrall to Egypt at that point, or up to that point. Besides, the story is not just about organically growing a religious system. It's about receiving the oracles of God on how he wanted their religion to function. So what we've seen from Genesis and Exodus has been, and as well as Leviticus, I suppose I should throw in there, has been the Israelites going from, well, nothing to a full-fledged nation in a very small period of time. That brings us to Numbers. And in comparison to Genesis and Exodus and Leviticus, which have these sort of archaic-sounding, almost mystic-sounding names, then we have a very run-of-the-mill Numbers. Why in the world would it be called such a thing? Well, let's pick up in chapter 1, verse 1. The Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tent of meeting on the first day of the 2nd month in the 2nd year after they had come out of the land of Egypt, saying, Take a census of all the congregation of the people of Israel, by clans, by fathers' houses, according to the number of names, every male head by head. From 20 years old and upward, all in Israel who are able to go to war, you and Aaron shall list them, company by company. Well, that explains it, doesn't it? The beginning of the book of Numbers, and it's sort of bookended as it happens, is about a census. It's about counting up the Israelites. And chapters 1 through 4 really are focused on this initial census. This counting is really about tallying up military strength. That was the condition of who was to be counted. All the males 20 years old and upward, everyone who is able to go to war. There's a reason that God wants them to count every man who can go to war. And we notice as we read on through chapters 1 through 4 that the tribe of Levi is not counted. Chapter 1, verse 47. But the Levites were not listed along with them by their ancestral tribe. For the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Only the tribe of Levi you shall not list, and you shall not take a census of them among the people of Israel, but appoint the Levites over the tabernacle of the testimony, and over all its furnishings, and over all that belongs to it. They are to carry the tabernacle and all its furnishings, and they shall take care of it, and shall camp around the tabernacle. When the tabernacle is to set out, the Levites shall take it down, and when the tabernacle is to be pitched, the Levites shall set it up. And if any outsider comes near, he shall be put to death. So they have their own duties, and really so does everyone else. In the case of the Levites, their duties do not include war, just like the duties of the women and the children do not include war, although they do have their own duties. God takes special care for how the nation is to be physically arranged in these chapters as well, both in the camp and when they are on the march. And the way that he has it organized is that it's all centered on the tabernacle in both instances. And he also gives places of honor to certain tribes for this reason and that. And, well, why? Why is it all centered around the tabernacle? Basically 3 reasons. One of them is very practical, to protect the tabernacle. There's an awful lot of wealth associated with the tabernacle, things that members of other nations very well would like to own and would like to steal it from the Israelites. So putting as much of a barrier between any potential raiders and God's holy things is going to be pretty important. Right along with that, the symbolic place at the center of the nation shows that this is something they are supposed to value. Really, it's the only thing that all of them are supposed to value. It's what binds them all together. And so as God places his tabernacle, his earthly throne, at the center of the camp and at the center of the procession as they're out on the march, he is deliberately trying to instill that value into his people. So we've got protection, values, and God's attempts to instill that notion in his people. Chapters 5 through 9 are a bit of a subject change, assorted laws. And it seems to reflect the nature of life in camp and on the move. It's as if, things come up, and if Moses isn't sure how to deal with them, then he takes them to God, and God gives answers and new laws on that basis, and then Moses relays those things to the people. And then we move on, and another thing comes up, and we start the process over again. So, for example, in chapter 5, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Command the people of Israel that they put out of the camp everyone who is leprous, or has a discharge, and everyone who is unclean through contact with the dead. You shall put out both male and female, putting them outside the camp, that they may not defile their camp in the midst of which I dwell. And the people of Israel did so, and put them outside the camp. As the Lord said to Moses, so the people of Israel did. Well, that's awfully harsh and unfeeling of God, isn't it? Well, no, not really. It's not out of a desire to single out or to mock those people who are sick. It's out of care for the general populace. Life goes on. Just because somebody's sick doesn't mean that everybody has to stop what they're doing. The idea is to quarantine the sick, get them away so that it doesn't spread, and then leave the healthy people alone. That's a novel idea, isn't it? Anyway, there's a bunch of these sorts of laws, and we're not going to cover them all, but there is another that is pretty important in Numbers chapter 6. Let's read the first 8 verses. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the people of Israel, and say to them, When either a man or a woman makes a special vow, the vow of a Nazirite, to separate himself to the Lord, he shall separate himself from wine and strong drink. He shall drink no vinegar made from wine or strong drink, and shall not drink any juice of grapes, or eat grapes fresh or dried. All the days of his separation he shall eat nothing that is produced by the grapevine, not even the seeds or the skins. All the days of his vow of separation no razor shall touch his head. Until the time is completed for which he separates himself to the Lord, he shall be holy. He shall let the locks of hair of his head grow long. All the days that he separates himself to the Lord, he shall not go near a dead body. Not even for his father or for his mother, for brother or sister, if they die, shall he make himself unclean, because his separation to God is on his head. All the days of his separation he is holy to the Lord. We see something similar to this in, the modern period, and really even going back long before that, in the practice of monasticism, which is when a person consecrates him or herself to the church, and the idea is to live a generally solitary and ascetic lifestyle for the duration of a particular term, sometimes lifelong, doing good deeds in service of God and man. This is, perhaps a bit misguided, seeing as there's nothing quite like this in the New Testament. And now God wants all of his people to be consecrated for his purpose, and not just a select few. But, well, some early Christians did take on vows too. Maybe not this one, but similar ones. For example, the Apostle Paul. You can read about that in Acts chapter 18, verse 18, and also not his vow, but some others associated with him in chapter 21, verse 23 of the book of Acts. So it's not that we're not allowed to take vows either, but at any rate, it does become important later on, this Nazirite vow, since it forms the context of the story of the judge, Samson, as well as perhaps John the Baptist to a lesser extent. The word Nazirite isn't used in association with John the Baptist, but it's pretty clear that John lived a lifestyle that was quite similar to this one. There's more stuff about priests and the tabernacle and the rest of the Levites, and then we get to chapter 9, and I'd like to read verses 1 through 5. And the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the first month of the second year after they had come out of the land of Egypt, saying, Let the people of Israel keep the Passover at its appointed time. On the 14th day of this month at twilight you shall keep it at its appointed time. According to all its statutes and all its rules you shall keep it. So Moses told the people of Israel that they should keep the Passover. And they kept the Passover in the first month on the 14th day of the month at twilight in the wilderness of Sinai, according to all that the Lord commanded Moses, so the people did. So the first Passover was the night Pharaoh released the Israelites from Egypt. And then there's chapters 13 through 40 of Exodus, and all of Leviticus, and chapters 1 through 8 of Numbers. And now we finally get to the second one. 1 year has transpired. And I think it's appropriate to take a moment and consider that. What have the Israelites accomplished since that time? Well, there's the escape from slavery in Egypt, of course, and then there's their observation of God's miracles as he proved his love and care for them as he led them through the wilderness. They entered into a sacred covenant with him at Mount Sinai. They rejected the covenant immediately, but after a judgment has transpired, they renew their vows, so to speak, and they renew that covenant. They receive the law in several installments. It's not completely given to them yet, but for the most part they've got it. They have also built the tabernacle. They have begun the regular worship, the daily and weekly and monthly offerings and that sort of thing, according to God's instructions. And now, by this point, they have also numbered the populace. That's quite a lot. It took 63 chapters to get through that 1 year. Now, the next 40 years are going to be crammed into the following 28 chapters in the book of Numbers. And that gives you an idea of what the pacing is going to look like from here on out. Chapter 10, they are headed to Canaan. This goes through chapter 14, and, well, it sounds like things are going really well. God has promised to take them up to this land, and off they go, but there are going to be some hitches in that plan. Chapter 10, verse 11. In the second year, in the second month, on the 20th day of the month, the cloud lifted from over the tabernacle of the testimony, and the people of Israel set out by stages from the wilderness of Sinai. And the cloud settled down in the wilderness of Paran. They set out for the first time at the command of the Lord by Moses. It sounds so great. Finally, where are they headed? The promised land, the inheritance that was promised to their forefathers Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and to their forefathers' descendants, these very people. They're going to the rest that awaits them, the whole reason that they undertook this whole exodus from Egypt. Well, chapter 11, verses 1 and 2. And the people complained in the hearing of the Lord about their misfortunes. And when the Lord heard it, his anger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burned among them, and consumed some outlying parts of the camp. Then the people cried out to Moses, and Moses prayed to the Lord, and the fire died down. Okay. The people are still complaining, again, and Moses is interceding for them, again. This just keeps happening. There were so many instances of this happening back in Exodus, and we're not done with it here in Numbers either. We saw the whole populace complain here in chapter 11. That's really not even the whole story. There's more complaining to come in chapter 11, but if we jump forward to chapter 12, even Moses' older sister and brother, Miriam and Aaron, also complained and, in some sense, rebelled against Moses. In chapter 12, let's read verses 1 through 4. Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. And they said, Has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also? And the Lord heard it. Now the man Moses was very meek, more than all the people who were on the face of the earth. And suddenly the Lord said to Moses and to Aaron and Miriam, Come out, you three, to the tent of meeting. And the three of them came out. Uh-oh. Well, guess what's going to happen? Moses is going to intercede on their behalf again. Moses very frequently foreshadows Christ. He's not getting anything selfish out of all this intercession. In fact, he's standing in the way of God's wrath. He's standing between the people and God, who is very angry at them. So we saw this on the national level in chapter 11, the personal level in chapter 12, and Christ does the same thing on a much higher level. Moses preserved their bodies of the whole nation as well as his brother and sister, and Christ preserves our souls, despite what we deserve, which is God's wrath. Okay, so we've got the whole nation rebelling and being corrected. We've got a couple of leaders rebelling and being corrected. Surely we're done with all of that, right? Well, chapter 13. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the people of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a chief among them. Who are these men? Well, Joshua, Caleb, and 10 jerks that nobody remembers. Why does nobody remember the other 10? Verse 25. At the end of 40 days they returned from spying out the land, and they came to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the people of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told him, We came to the land to which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. However, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the Negeb, the Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the hill country, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan. Okay, so they're just relaying the facts, but you can tell by the tone and what they're focusing on here that the 10 of the spies are wimping out here. They're saying, we're too afraid. We don't think that we can handle this land because of all of the nations, and particularly the giants, the sons of Anak. Joshua and Caleb, however, disagree. Verse 30. But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, Let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it. There was such a disagreement over this that the other side is ready to kill Joshua and Caleb over their dissent. They just won't take what God is offering. They're too scared. Chapter 14, beginning of verse 11. And the Lord said to Moses, How long will this people despise me? And how long will they not believe in me, in spite of all the signs that I have done among them? I will strike them with the pestilence, and disinherit them, and I will make of you a nation greater and mightier than they. But Moses said to the Lord, yes, that's right, as usual, Moses stands in the way and intercedes on behalf of the nation, not saying they don't deserve this, but saying, of course they deserve it, but nevertheless, please don't destroy them. And what happens? God relents, but he does refuse to give the inheritance to this generation, because, well, would you? But their kids, on the other hand, are not responsible for this rebellion, for this decision. So, verse 31, But your little ones, who you said would become a prey, I will bring in, and they shall know the land that you have rejected. Now, a handful change their minds at this and disobey the orders and decide they're going to go up and conquer the land now, and it goes about how you would imagine without God's backing. There's a stark lesson in this for us today. The promise of entering God's rest is open to all. If you reject it, then don't expect him to listen when you conveniently change your mind after the fact. When he says go up, go up. In chapter 15, we get more laws. Chapters 16 and 17 continue the journey and the rebellion. This time there's a more dramatic ending where the earth opens up and swallows up the ringleaders of the rebellion, reminding everyone that Moses and Aaron do indeed bear God's seal of approval to lead this nation. Chapters 18 and 19 have more laws. Chapter 20 has some downfalls and some changes. The downfall, the death of Miriam, Moses' sister, and the downfall of Moses, the incident of the waters at Meribah. Also sort of the downfall of Edom, when Edom refuses passage to the Israelites as they are asking just to go through Edom's land on their way up to the Promised Land. And finally, the death of Aaron. There's not really time for us to talk about all of these, but I mean, Meribah is just too golden an opportunity. So let's read from that. Chapter 20, verse 2. Now there was no water for the congregation, and they assembled themselves together against Moses and against Aaron. And the people quarreled with Moses and said, Would that we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord. Why have you brought the assembly of the Lord into this wilderness, that we should die here, both we and our cattle? And why have you made us come up out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? It is no place for grain, or figs, or vines, or pomegranates, and there is no water to drink. How many times do we have to do this whole song and dance? This time, after having interceded on behalf of the people over and over and over, Moses falters. Verse 6. Then Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Take the staff and assemble the congregation, you and Aaron your brother, and tell the rock before their eyes to yield its water. So you shall bring water out of the rock for them, and give drink to the congregation and their cattle. And Moses took the staff from before the Lord as he commanded him. Sounds good so far, almost exactly the same as the previous scenario in Exodus 17, where at a different location, like this exact same thing seems to have played out. Let's see how it works out this time. Verse 10. Then Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock and said to them, Hear now, you rebels, shall we bring water for you out of this rock? And Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock with his staff twice, and water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank and their livestock. I mean, it worked, but that's not what God said to do. And also, what's with the attitude, Moses? Shall we bring water for you out of this rock? We, like Moses and Aaron, we? I'm pretty sure it doesn't work that way, guys. God is equally unimpressed with this. Verse 12. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, Because you did not believe in me to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them. Well, that's hard to stomach. After all that Moses has done, in this instance his disobedience is construed as a failure to believe in God. Why is this so important? Well, some of it's self-explanatory, but for the rest, think about the way that Moses foreshadows Christ so often. This time he's not doing that. Moses isn't foreshadowing Christ. Instead, the rock is. Paul talks about this in 1 Corinthians 10. And all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. Nevertheless, with most of them God was not pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Well, that's weird. And we don't have time to discuss it in full, but Paul was pointing out that Christ is the source of this living water in a desert of sin and death, and that the Jewish nation, representing mankind as a whole, and here symbolized by Moses, the lawgiver, did not regard him as holy and struck him till he bled. And even so, he poured out that water of life for us. Now there is still a reckoning for the part that we played in striking him. In Moses' case, he gets what we deserve. He is prohibited from entering the promised rest across the river. And all who approach Christ with reference to the old way, pure law and justice, are likewise denied entry. But the children who, despite their many shortcomings, have come to trust in God and in the rock that stands for Christ, who nevertheless drink the water of life that he offers, for them an inheritance is reserved, a room in God's house forever. God knows what he's doing. And the things that happen in the Old Testament aren't just ancient history to be studied by a handful of nerds who enjoy learning about such things. They are intended to teach us important lessons. In chapters 21 through 25, the people are getting closer and closer to the promised land. There's the whole crazy business with Balaam, the Gentile prophet, and various attempts to bind God into cursing Israel. It works out about as well as you would imagine fighting with God would work out. But while the world, Satan's domain, couldn't outright curse Israel, it could entice Israel to bring a curse upon itself, and that is the topic of chapter 25. While Israel lived in Shittim, the people began to whore with the daughters of Moab. These invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. So Israel yoked himself to Baal of Peor, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. Well, yeah, duh, what did you think was going to happen? They get through this ordeal with the help of another mediator of sorts, Aaron's grandson, Phinehas, who eventually would become high priest. In chapter 26, we have another census. As I said, there's one at the beginning and one at the end as bookends. Chapters 27 through 30 cover more laws. They focus on offerings and vows, but there's some other stuff in there too. Chapters 31 through 33 cover the conquests on the east side of the Jordan. These are lands that will eventually go to several tribes who like it just fine over there. And then chapter 33 is a full itinerary of the Israelites' travels since leaving Egypt, which I will spare you except for one key detail. Chapter 33, verse 37. And they set out from Kadesh and camped at Mount Hor on the edge of the land of Edom. And Aaron the priest went up to Mount Hor at the command of the Lord and died there in the 40th year after the people of Israel had come out of the land of Egypt, on the first day of the 5th month. 40 years flew past, didn't they? It's important to note that the vast majority of the story is left out, obviously. The really important stuff is included as God saw fit. And it's not just a random collection, as we noticed in the previous few episodes. There's an awful lot of the gospel of Jesus Christ in this book. Chapters 34 and 35 are about preparing to enter into the promised land, and it shades over into chapter 36, which has a somewhat obscure law in it. And that's the end of Numbers. It's kind of an anticlimactic ending, isn't it? But what's coming up? This is meant to lead directly into Deuteronomy on the next page. These are the words that Moses spoke to all Israel beyond the Jordan in the wilderness. As one ends, so begins the other, and this sort of mirrors our own situation. After all that we have been through, and all that God has given us, and all our mistakes, and all our rebellion, we still have God's promise to His people. But in the meantime, we prepare to cross over, and we busy ourselves with life on this side, learning God's expectations and following His chosen prophet, or else continuing to rebel. It's your choice which side of that you want to be on. You saw how it ended up for those who rebelled and disobeyed and rejected God's appointed leaders. They met with awful ends, and even when they didn't, they were at least refused entry into the land promised to their ancestors. They were passed over in favor of the next generation, who were by no means perfect, but they walked with God and accepted correction and acted in faith, as the day that they would set foot in the promised land drew ever nearer. Which of these two groups has your name on the list? Are you the one who is pining after your old slavery and sin, or just trying to bring it with you into a covenant with God? Or are you the one beating Christ with a stick and elevating yourself above God? Or are you one of the children, drinking the water of life and following where God leads in faith that He will bring you to His home one day? If you're on the wrong side of this and want to change that, we'd love to help at River Ridge. Please get in touch with us. You can call us or text us at 812-550-6234 or email us at info@riverridgechurch.org. You can also find us at 5600 Van Road in Newburgh. We gather at 9 a.m. every Sunday for Bible study, 10 a.m. for worship, 4 p.m. for afternoon worship, and 7 p.m. on Wednesdays for another study. I'd love to see you there. Thanks for joining me today on Iron Sharpens Iron.